Morning, everybody. I'm Barbara Derrick, and I am the Executive Director of Smoke Free SC, and we are so happy to have you at our roundtable this month. I'm going to turn it over to Tara to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us for this month's SC Tobacco Partners Roundtable. We missed having everyone join us last month when we had to cancel, but we're so glad that you could join us this month. Today we have Dr. Tracy Smith from MUSC as our guest speaker. I'm going to hand the presentation over to her, and I will let her introduce herself and then get her presentation started. As always, the meeting is recorded, so we will upload it to our website and to our YouTube channel next week if you want to come back and watch it, or if you'd like to share it with anyone else.
Okay, let me know if you can't hear me. I'm going to try to share my slides. Okay. I hope you can see it. Someone tell me if you can't.
We can.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, my name is Tracy Smith. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. I am an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at MUSC. I'm also a member of the Cancer Control and Prevention Program at Hollings Cancer Center. And I've been here at MUSC for, I don't know, maybe 6 years-ish. And I was at the University of Pittsburgh before that, but I'm a South Carolina native. I'm from Columbia. I went to Irma High School. So South Carolina is, near and dear to my heart. So I was asked to speak because I think somebody saw an article that was in the Post and Courier, or a local news article that was about some recently funded work. And so I'm here to talk specifically about 2 studies. So this is my current funding profile. It's all NIH, NIDA, and CI funding. The 2 trials that are in red are the 2 that the news article was about. And so I'm happy, and those are the 2 that I'm going to talk about today. There are 2 other recently funded RO1s that are listed right below that are tangentially related to the overall kind of body of work. And I'm happy to talk about those too, if you're interested. Standard disclosures that all the research that I'm going to talk about was supported by NIDA at NIH and FDA. Those are the award numbers. All the views are my own, and I don't have any conflicts of interest or disclosures. I don't have any financial ties to any tobacco company or anything like that. Okay, so I do work that is what I call tobacco regulatory science. And what that means is that I do research with the goal of providing really rigorous data to the FDA so that they can use that data in making decisions about how to regulate tobacco products for the improvement of public health. And so in 2009, FDA got the authority to regulate tobacco from Congress. And this is Obama signing the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. And that's what specifically gave the FDA the authority to regulate tobacco products. The FDA can do a lot of things. There are specific things they cannot do. But one of the things they can do is they can set product standards for a class of tobacco products. So they can say all cigarettes now need to meet X standard. And they do that. They're supposed to do that based on data and science about the impact of any decision on both current users and naive individuals. So FDA is always kind of weighing those populations. What's the impact of this regulation going to be on people who currently use tobacco? What's it going to be on people who don't currently use tobacco? And that's one of the reasons that e-cigarettes and products like that are so complicated, because they're trying to weigh both of those populations. So the projects that I'm going to talk about are not there. One of them is in particular is not necessarily an e-cigarette project, but they do all involve e-cigarettes in some way. And so, I wanted to give some background information about e-cigarettes, the harms of e-cigarettes, the potential benefits of e-cigarettes, and just so that everybody kind of has the same information going in. So tobacco products exist on a continuum of harm. And so what I mean by that is just that they're not all equally harmful. There are no safe tobacco products. They are all harmful in some way, and some of the harms are unknown. And so the most harmful tobacco product by far is combustible cigarettes. It's not even close. That's where the bulk of the harm from tobacco use comes from. And we've known for decades that the combustion, the burning of the tobacco, that is the driver of a lot of the harm. And other combustible products are also incredibly harmful. And then products that are not combusted are less harmful. And it is hard to say how much less harmful, but we feel pretty confident that they're less harmful. And so I'll talk about some of that as well. The best thing is not to use tobacco at all, is abstinence. And products that are nicotine products that are approved by FDA for smoking cessation, like nicotine replacement products, those are going to be the safest things. Nicotine's not benign, but that's not the primary driver of harm. So nicotine replacement products are pretty safe. So products that are non-combusted, like e-cigarettes, present a real problem for FDA because they are potentially beneficial for adults who currently smoke cigarettes. So adults who currently smoke cigarettes are using the worst tobacco product they could possibly be using. It kills 1/3 to 50% of long-term users. It causes it's the leading cause of preventable death. It really drives that death and illness. And so using a product that's not combusted would reduce the long-term health risks for those people. And so from a public health standpoint, that's a reason for FDA to keep non-combustible products out there and appealing for adults who currently smoke. On the other hand, these products are not safe. They cause documented short-term health risks, and their long-term health risks are largely unknown. So we know we don't want kids using them. We know we don't want non-users using them. And so that presents this tug of war for FDA that makes it really difficult for FDA to regulate these tobacco products in a way that is best for public health, considering both of those populations. So what do we know about the risks of vaping nicotine in particular? So as everybody knows, there's no data on the long-term health effects. They just haven't been out there that long. We don't have 30 years, 50 years, 60 years of vaping, and it's going to be some time before we do. That being said, we do have quite a bit of short-term information on both. I would put it in two categories. One is toxicant exposure and toxicant delivery. And we also have data on short-term health outcomes that suggest that these products are better for your health than smoking, but worse than not using anything. And so that's the safer but not safe that people talk about. So the NASEM report was the National Academies of Engineering, Science, and Medicine that did a very thorough review of this. It's several years old now, but they found conclusive evidence that complete switching from cigarettes to e-cigarettes does reduce exposure to toxicants and carcinogens. So we know where the drivers, chemical-wise, of tobacco use, the drivers of those harms are, and e-cigarettes deliver lower levels of those. And when I say vaping and e-cigarette use, I'm using those terms interchangeably. Vaping does worsen asthma, bronchitis, and cough among non-smokers. So we know that it's not good for your respiratory health if you are a non-smoker. And that's why, we don't want kids using them. We don't want non-users using them. We have short-term data to suggest that it does cause some harm. However, for people who smoke and they have asthma or they have COPD, we see improvements in those symptoms when somebody switches completely to an e-cigarette. So again, it exists in between combustible smoking and abstinence. We know that smokers who switch to e-cigarettes show improved lung and vascular function, that they have fewer respiratory symptoms than people that smoke. And so they're not safe, but we can safely say that it is safer than smoking. And people who currently smoke cigarettes would reduce their harm by complete switching. Now, FDA is doing a review, and I'll talk more about this later, but they're doing a review of e-cigarette products that have applied to be on the market through the PMTA process right now. And they do a very thorough review of all the data for individual product. And they have authorized 23 devices and tobacco flavored e-liquids. And they do that based on the decision that it would be appropriate for the protection of public health to have those products out there because they deliver lower levels of toxicant exposure. In terms of behavior, like the impact of these products on behavior, we do have reason to believe that they can promote abstinence or promote switching among adults who smoke. So the kind of the best seminal trial, the first one that came out in this area that was really, really rigorous, came from Peter Hayek. This is the little snippet of the article if you want to look at it. Peter Hayek in the UK did a trial where he either provided people with e-cigarettes or nicotine replacement therapy, so FDA approved nicotine replacement therapy. And he found that at 1 year later, 18% of the people in the e-cigarette group were abstinent from cigarettes versus 9.9% in the nicotine replacement nicotine replacement group. Now, 80% of those people who were in the e-cigarette group that quit were still vaping. So it's not like nicotine replacement therapy where people use it for a little while and they get off. Most of these people are using it in the long term. And so that's the trade-off, right? Is that ideally they would not be doing that. But the reality of the situation is they've likely reduced their harm, but they're using a tobacco product in the long term. We now have a lot of clinical trials that have confirmed that information. And the Cochrane review, which is really the group that does these meta-analyses and makes large decisions based on the data, found high certainty evidence that e-cigarettes with nicotine increase quit rates compared to nicotine replacement therapy. And so they found that evidence now at this point is really quite strong. We've done some of this work ourselves. So these are the data from a clinical trial that was recently published like last week by my colleague, Matt Carpenter, and a group of us here at MUSC did it. But it was a clinical trial that was nationwide. And the goal was to ask whether or not e-cigarettes can promote switching and reduce cigarette smoking compared to a control. The unique thing in this trial is that people who were given the e-cigarette were not instructed on how to use it or instructed to switch completely. So it was kind of more like how it is when people buy it commercially. They were told you can use it or not use it as you wish to reduce, quit, or during smoking restrictions. It's completely up to you. People in this trial got to choose between different e-cigarette flavors. So everybody's an adult smoker with minimal history of vaping. They either got an e-cigarette or not, and they got it for a 4-week period. And this is a nationwide trial. We followed them for a 6-month period to look at whether or not they used the e-cigarette product and how it affected their cigarette smoking. And so these are the data on the percentage of people in both groups who reduced the amount that they smoked cigarettes by at least 50%. And again, cigarette smoking is the most harmful tobacco product. And so what you see is that the e-cigarette product, people who in the e-cigarette group were more likely to reduce how much they smoke by 50% at all time points compared to people in the control group. This is the percentage of people who quit smoking. So not just reduced, but quit. And again, I don't have the legend, but the orange is the e-cigarette group. So people in the e-cigarette group were more likely to quit smoking than people in the control group at all of the follow-up time points. Again, they only got 4 weeks of product, but those effects still hold at 6 months. So just as a kind of a background before I start talking about the trials in particular, a summary: cigarettes are by far the most harmful tobacco product. E-cigarettes are also harmful, but smokers who switch completely are likely to substantially reduce their long-term harms. E-cigarettes can promote abstinence better than NRT and better than no intervention, even when people are not given specific instructions to switch. So when I think about regulating tobacco, and I know that e-cigarettes, e-cigarettes are kind of the trendy thing to talk about and research because we know so little. And I do think it's incredibly important that we gather more data on those products. But the most effective interventions that we could possibly do from a public health perspective are going to be those that reduce the addictiveness and the appeal of combustible tobacco. And that's because combustible tobacco is the primary driver of harm. It's what is killing people. And so regulations that reduce the addictiveness of those products and the appeal of those products, those are going to be the ones that we can say saved the most lives in the long term. And if that's the outcome that we care the most about, then that's really where we ought to put our money and our time. And so I spent probably 10 years doing research on a regulation that would reduce how much nicotine is in cigarettes to be non-addictive. And that is something that FDA has said that they plan to do, although I think it's a long ways off. But I think that intervention is probably the most effective intervention we could possibly take on in this country. It's something New Zealand has said that they plan to do and are going to implement in the next couple of years. So I'm happy to talk about that work another time if people are interested. But another intervention that we could do as a country that would reduce the appeal of combustible tobacco is to ban menthol. And so menthol is a flavoring that some cigarettes have as a characterizing flavor. Almost all cigarettes have a little bit of it, but a subset of cigarette brands are menthol flavored. And it's been on the market since the 1930s. The first menthol cigarette brand was called Spuds. And over the past several decades, one of the things that's happened is as we've made gains in tobacco control, as we've reduced the prevalence of smoking, most of those gains have come from non-menthol people who smoke non-menthol cigarettes. That's really where the reductions in cigarette sales have come from, and menthol cigarette smoking has remained remarkably stable. And what that means is over time, menthol has taken up a larger and larger share of the marketplace, that more people percentage-wise are using menthol compared to non-menthol than before. Why would we want to ban menthol? Menthol is not necessarily harmful. We don't know that it's harmful from a health perspective. It's not like menthol cigarettes necessarily cause cancer at a higher rate because of the menthol themselves. However, menthol from a public health standpoint, it gets people smoking and it keeps people smoking. And so that's why we would want to get rid of it. So we know that menthol might increase smoking initiation. People who are young and people who don't smoke when they initiate smoking, they're more likely to smoke menthol cigarettes. We also know that menthol cigarette smokers score higher on measures of dependence, for some measures of dependence, and they have a harder time quitting smoking. They're more likely to try to quit, but they're less likely to be successful. And that it contributes to tobacco use disparities. So menthol is more commonly used among a lot of groups that you might worry about that are more affected by tobacco-related disparities, like African Americans in particular, women, members of the LGBTQ community, individuals with low income, low education, those with comorbid mental illness, people who have substance use disorders, people who have mental health disorders. So it's just more commonly used in all of the groups that we kind of worry about. African Americans make up only 30% of menthol smokers, but 80% of African American people who smoke use menthol cigarettes. And that's primarily due to targeting. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. So in 2021, the FDA said that they announced that they plan to ban menthol. So that is something that they're working on. I've been to lots of FDA talks in the last year, and every single time they announced that they plan to make a formal rule on that this year in 2023. Nothing ever happens on time at the FDA, so my guess is it'll be early 2024, but I do think it is coming, and I think the FDA will announce a formal rule to ban menthol in the United States. It will take a long time, so they will be immediately sued. They'll be, we're talking 5 years, 10 years, longer than that, but I'm optimistic personally that this will get done in the United States at some time. And so when that happens, we shockingly don't have a ton of information on the exact pathways that people who smoke menthol cigarettes will take. So we have some data. We have small clinical trials. We have data from the UK and Canada. They don't have menthol cigarettes over there anymore, to tell us what the impact of a cigarette menthol ban will be. So people who smoke menthol cigarettes could switch to non-menthol cigarettes and smoke more of those or fewer of those. And those have different impacts on public health. They could quit smoking altogether because their preferred product is not available anymore, and that would be good for public health. Or they could switch to an e-cigarette. And whether or not they switch to an e-cigarette or another product like a nicotine pouch or something like that, whether or not they switch to another tobacco product may depend on whether or not menthol is still available and flavors are still available in those non-cigarette tobacco products. So if FDA gets rid of menthol in e-cigarettes as well, and so far they have yet to authorize a menthol flavored e-cigarette, then people may be less likely to switch to an e-cigarette because there's no menthol available in those either. And that could be good or it could be bad. If people are not going to switch to an e-cigarette and instead they're going to quit smoking, that's good. And we should get rid of menthol and e-cigarettes at the same time. And that way everybody, a larger portion of people will quit smoking. If people don't switch to an e-cigarette because menthol is not available in e-cigarettes anymore, and instead they just keep smoking non-menthol cigarettes, then that's bad, because ideally we would prefer people switch than continue to smoke. And so the different permutations of whether or not menthol is still available in which products and the impact that that has on behavior are largely unknown. And of course, it depends. People are different. It may depend on people's individual demographic and baseline characteristics, which pathway they take. And all of those things together will have a combined population health effect for smokers. So the first grant that I want to talk about is really the question that I'm setting out to answer is, how would a menthol ban impact smoking behavior, switching to e-cigarettes, and quitting? And I should say, I don't know if I said this at the outset, but the article that was published about the couple of grants, it was published because the grants were just funded. So these are all recently funded grants. None of them are recruiting participants yet. This will be the first one to do so, and our launch date is November 1st. So there's still time if you have comments related to procedures or suggestions of things you think I should measure. There's still time to incorporate this. So we really want to ask, how would a menthol ban for cigarettes and for e-cigarettes impact smoking behavior, switching to e-cigarettes, and quitting? And so we're going to recruit 240 people. Everybody we recruit is going to be a current user of menthol cigarettes. So someone who would be directly impacted by a menthol ban. Everybody is going to get assigned to a cigarette condition. They're either going to get assigned to a menthol cigarette, and that is the control condition, right? That's no ban. They still have menthol cigarettes. Or they're going to get assigned to a non-menthol cigarette. So that models a menthol ban where they don't have menthol available anymore. All they have is non-menthol cigarettes. We opted to use research cigarettes. So these are Spectrum cigarettes. They're available through the NIDA drug supply program. So they're ordered from the government. They're made by RTI. And so these cigarettes are not available on the market. And the reason for that is I didn't want one group to have to switch brands and the other group not. So to hold everything constant except menthol, everyone is going to switch brands. They're going to switch to a menthol, or they're going to switch to a research cigarette that will either be menthol flavored or not. We will try to model this policy scenario by asking everyone to please only use the products that we provide to them. Don't use anything else. Now, of course, we cannot stop people who are assigned on menthol cigarettes from cheating and going out and buying Newports or whatever their preferred brand is. We will be able to, we will ask people about their cheating. We're collecting urine, and our partners at UCSF are going to analyze the urine for urinary menthol exposure. So we'll have a measure of cheating. And we also have a really great statistical partner who can estimate the impact of the intervention if everyone had been adherent, using what we know about who was adherent and who was not adherent. So we're going to do our best to get around the fact that some people are definitely going to cheat. Everybody also is going to have access to an e-cigarette that they can use or not use. It's up to them. Again, I don't care what they use, just not anything except what I give them. And so everybody is going to get either a tobacco flavored e-cigarette or a menthol flavored e-cigarette. And so that models either getting rid of menthol and only having tobacco flavored e-cigarettes on the market, or having menthol still available in e-cigarettes. So that forms 4 conditions. It forms different permutations of cigarette and e-cigarette assignment. So one condition is the status quo. That's as if there was no ban. They get menthol flavored cigarettes and menthol flavored e-cigarettes. They can use either or both or one or the other. And that's the current situation, right? People can go to the store and buy either of those things. They will get a non-menthol cigarette and still have a menthol e-cigarette. So that models a situation in which menthol is banned, but for cigarettes only. They can have non-menthol cigarettes and tobacco flavored e-cigarettes, and that models a situation in which menthol is gone from both products. Or they could have menthol cigarettes and tobacco flavored e-cigarette, and that models a situation where FDA does not implement a cigarette menthol ban, but they do get rid of all flavors, including menthol, from e-cigarettes. And so that's the 4 permutations that we have, and everybody's in one of those 4 conditions. It's not blind, because you can't blind menthol status. People know when they try the cigarette whether it's flavored like menthol or not. And so that makes it a little bit different than a lot of the trials that I'm used to doing. So people are going to come in at baseline, and for a 1-week period, I'm going to give everybody their usual brand menthol cigarette for free for a 1-week period. And the goal of that is really to see how many cigarettes people smoke when cigarettes are free, because during the intervention period, the cigarettes are free. And so people are probably going to smoke more of them than they would normally. So I want a good baseline of what that looks like when cigarettes are free. So everyone gets their usual brand. We're recruiting from 3 sites. So not just Charleston, which is where I am, but we're going to recruit in the regional health network hospitals that MUSC has been purchasing. Right now, we have planned to launch in Florence and in Lancaster, but that could include Midlands or other locations down the line. Over a 6-week period, people get their study product, whatever their assignment is, and they bring it back, and we give them more if needed. They complete assessments. It's provided free of charge. They complete a diary every single day to tell us how much they smoked, what other products they may have used, if they cheated. They give a breath sample, they give a urine sample across that 6-week period. 6 weeks is really the primary endpoint. That's the end of the time period where we're looking at quitting, switching, continued use of cigarettes. I should also say that everyone also has access to NRT, and that's not group specific. Everybody in any group can take home NRT if they want to, and we'll ask them every single week, did you want to take home NRT today? And the reason for that is if someone wants to quit smoking, we want to facilitate that, and we want to measure it, because obviously that's the ideal outcome. And so we wanted another nicotine product that's the safe, effective product rather than just cigarettes available. At the end of that 6-week period, we're going to ask everyone to engage in a practice quit attempt. And the reason for that is we know that people who smoke menthol cigarettes have a harder time quitting. And so it's possible that after a menthol ban, people who smoke menthol cigarettes may have an easier time quitting. And we want to measure that. And it may depend on what e-cigarette they were assigned to as well. So it's a practice quit attempt, because these are not people who are necessarily motivated to quit at baseline. They don't have to be. They don't have to have any interest in quitting. So it's just for practice. And we're going to ask them to abstain from smoking. They can still use their e-cigarette or can use NRT. And we expect that some people may start using NRT or start using an e-cigarette during this 1-week period, because we really want to see, just based on which condition they were in, whether or not they're able to abstain from smoking. They're going to send us 2 breath samples every single day to confirm that they have not smoked. And so the goal here is basically to say, we're going to model you being motivated to quit using money. I'm going to pay you to be abstinent. And now that you're motivated, can you do it, and for how long? And so everybody can keep using their e-cigarette and NRT. Everybody gets paid when they're abstinent. So the payments decrease every day. So on day 1, people can get $80, $40 for day 2, and it's cut in half every single day. The assumption here is that at some point people will lapse. They will return to smoking because the money won't be worth it. So at maybe $2.50, it's not worth it to them to be abstinent for the entire day. And that tells us something about how valuable smoking is to them in that condition. And that may depend on whether or not they're in a menthol condition for cigarettes or e-cigarettes. So a primary outcome, what we're really interested in is cigarettes per day, is how it changes people's smoking to be in each of these 4 conditions, whether or not they use e-cigarettes, including complete switching, cessation, and that includes quit attempts, choosing to take home NRT, choosing to use NRT, sustained abstinence from cigarette smoking, and then time to lapse in week 7. In that practice quit attempt week, how long does it take them to lapse to cigarette smoking? And so all of this will provide FDA with information about the impact of a menthol ban for cigarettes and e-cigarettes on public health. We're working with Dr. Dave Levy, who's at Georgetown, who in year 5 is going to take all of the data and do some really nice modeling to say in each of the 4 combinations, each of the 4 groups, how many life years do we estimate would be saved by that policy scenario, and how many deaths would be averted. And so that's the kind of data that I think will be really useful. So that's the kind of data that I think will be really useful to FDA. So those are the 4 conditions that we'll be able to provide information about. Okay, we're right at halfway. I'm going to switch over to talk about the other trial. Does anyone have questions about this trial or what I've said so far before I move on? Feel free to unmute. Okay. Maybe at the end. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the second trial. They were both funded together on the same day. They are both, they're NIDA grants, but they're also FDA grants. So the money comes from FDA, Center for Tobacco Products, for the purpose of informing the regulations that they make, and it's in partnership with NIDA. So this is a trial that really focuses, it's still about flavoring, but it's really about e-cigarette flavoring and not about those interventions for cigarettes. And again, I know that e-cigarette flavoring is a hot topic, but in terms of what's going to have the biggest impact on public health, getting people off cigarettes by reducing appeal and addictiveness, that's where the bang for your money is. So e-cigarettes flavoring, there's no topic, I don't think, about e-cigarettes that is more controversial or complicated than flavors. So you guys are probably familiar, I don't think I need to tell this group that there are 5 million flavors of e-cigarettes. Some of them in particular, like shown in this picture, are particularly abhorrent and target children. But in general, we know that flavors are appealing to kids. And we know that kids, just like we know that people who start smoking cigarettes are more likely to start smoking menthol cigarettes, we know that flavors in e-cigarettes are one of the primary drivers of youth use. And so that's part of what makes them such a complicated thing for FDA to regulate. So FDA is supposed to be evaluating all of the tobacco products that came on the market after 2016. All of the markets that came on the market prior to between basically 2007 and 2016, before they would be available for commercial sale. So FDA said they were required to have everyone submit by a deadline in 2020, an application, it's called PMTA, pre-market tobacco products application, to stay on the market. And FDA is supposed to make a decision about each individual product based on whether or not having that product on the market is appropriate for the protection of public health. And again, that's supposed to consider both users and non-users. And so FDA got over 6 million applications by that 2020 deadline. And I know they've received many more since then. So it is something that has been, I think, quite a burden for them to work through over the last 3 years, but they're making progress and we're getting a sense of kind of what information they're using to make those decisions. So the first thing right out of the gate that FDA did was they denied 55,000 e-cigarette products that were flavored by saying that they failed to provide any evidence that they were appropriate for the protection of public health. FDA did permit the marketing of an e-cigarette product, and that was the first one that they did. Kind of made big news because it meant that there were some situations under which FDA was willing to say that an e-cigarette product was appropriate for the protection of public health. And since then, they've authorized quite a few more. So I mentioned it already, but there's 23 products that are authorized, and that includes like the device, the battery is its own product, a 5% pod is a separate product, then a 2.4% pod. So every specific product is considered its own authorization. So they've authorized 23 so far, and all of the ones that have been authorized are tobacco flavored, or the battery that goes with a tobacco flavored pod. And so they've done that. When they authorize those products, they come out and say that there was sufficient evidence to show that it reduced exposure to harmful ingredients for people who currently smoke. And they say that there was evidence showing that the products promoted switching. So there have to be clinical trials showing not just that they reduce toxin exposure, but that smokers will switch. And then there has to be evidence showing that they're not appealing to kids. And so those are the pieces of evidence that they have that they've used to make those decisions. They denied Juul. That made big news. You probably heard about that. Juul's still out there on the market through a legal order, but we'll see what happens. FDA is still reviewing it, and it's possible that Juul is going to go away completely. I do know that Juul Labs put in a new application for Juul 2, which is the product that's currently for sale in the UK. But Juul, obviously is very controversial just by itself. FDA has continued to make progress. At some point they came out and said, we've gotten through over 90% of these applications. We're slogging away. We're making progress. And what they have said about those decisions is this, and that's really what this statement and these kinds of statements is really what drove our second trial. FDA has said that they've issued marketing denial orders for about 1 million flavored e-cigarette products because the applications lacked sufficient evidence that they have a benefit to adult smokers that is sufficient to overcome the public health threat posed to youth of these products. So basically, we know kids like flavors. We know that flavors are getting kids hooked on e-cigarettes, and we don't want that. And we know that tobacco flavored e-cigarettes can help people switch. And you haven't done anything as a company to show me that these other flavors are provide additional benefit above and beyond the benefit that's provided by a tobacco. And so we really set out to ask that question do these other flavors that are not tobacco flavored, do they provide a benefit above and beyond the benefit that is provided by tobacco flavors? So we already know that tobacco flavors can help people switch, that they reduce toxicant exposure. Is there an additional benefit to having these non-tobacco flavors on the market? And it's very possible that there isn't, in which case, if they don't promote switching better than tobacco flavors, then they really don't have a role on the market and they shouldn't be available because they are attractive to kids and we should get rid of them. If they do promote switching better than tobacco flavors, then FDA should have that information, and it's something they have to weigh. How big is the benefit? Is it incremental, in which case maybe it still doesn't outweigh the threat to youth? Is it substantial? FDA has to weigh that information along with all the other information they have about kids. You would be surprised to learn that we actually don't have a lot of randomized trials on flavors. I was really surprised to learn that when we went to write this trial. There's a lot of observational data to show that flavors, that people are more likely to switch with flavors, that people like the flavors better, but no randomized trials on that question. And so this is some of the observational data. You remember that I talked about that trial at the beginning that was conducted, led by Matt Carpenter here at MUSC. So in that trial, I mentioned that people got to choose their flavor. So they're not randomly assigned, but they got to choose. And one of the flavors that was available to them was a tobacco flavor. So we went back and looked at those data to try to understand whether people who chose tobacco did better or worse than people who chose the other flavors. And these are those data. So what you see in the group of people who chose only tobacco or mostly tobacco is really small. Even people who chose only tobacco, when we sent them their first shipment, usually picked something else their second shipment. So just that is kind of indicative to me that, people don't love the tobacco flavor. But we did see, this is the reduction in cigarette per day of at least 50% at week 4, a reduction of at least 50% at 6 months. And then PPA is point prevalence abstinence, so quitting, whether or not people have quit at week 4 and quit at 6 months. And so what you see is that the people who didn't primarily choose tobacco flavors were more likely to reduce their cigarette smoking at week 4 and week 24. And they were more likely to be abstinent too, but this is not a significant difference. The limitation here is that this is not randomized, right? So people chose whether or not they wanted tobacco or they wanted the fruit flavors. And maybe the people who chose the fruit flavors were just enjoying the e-cigarette more and more likely to switch. We don't know because this isn't randomized. It doesn't tell us about what would happen if you didn't have the non-tobacco flavors as an option. And so that's what we're going to do. This is going to be a randomized trial to test the impact of e-cigarette flavoring on switching from cigarettes to e-cigarettes. This is a trial that's conducted, it's a partnership, what's called MPI, so we're both in charge, with Dr. Ted Wagner, who's at Ohio State University. And it's going to be a nationwide trial. So we are going to recruit 1,500 people. It'll be the biggest trial that any of us have ever done, but I have confidence in us. We're going to recruit 1,500 people who currently smoke cigarettes, and we're going to assign them to one of 3 groups. So people are either going to be assigned to a tobacco flavored group. So that models only having tobacco flavors out there. The pictures show Juul, and that's because in the grant, that's what we propose to use is Juul, but we're not going to use Juul. Once Juul got the denial order and whatever, we're using a different product now. We're actually going to use the Views Alto, but the pictures still show Juul because I already had these slides made. So people are going to be in a tobacco group. The tobacco group does get 2 options. So there's kind of like a light tobacco and a richer tobacco option. And that's because I think just having a choice is probably important. Like not having a choice, people may not like that. Maybe they just don't like that particular flavor, and there's nothing wrong with tobacco as a whole. So they're going to get to choose between 2 tobacco options. There's going to be a flavors group. We call it the preferred flavor group, and they get to choose between a whole bunch of flavors. For the products we're going to give, it's going to be the 2 tobacco flavors. They could still choose those. 2 menthol flavors, it's like one's a menthol, one's a mint, and 2 fruit flavors. And the fruit flavors are like, I can't remember what they are, but there's 2 fruit flavors, and people will get to choose what they want. And then the control group gets NRT. And they get combination NRT, patch plus lozenge, just because it's better to have an active control than have nothing. Because of course, e-cigarettes are going to do better than nothing. So anyway, the design is that we're going to recruit people and bring them in and randomize them. Everyone gets mailed a study kit that will have a little bit of whatever their assigned product is in it, like 2 of each pod and a sample, and we'll ship it out to people in this baseline period where we're measuring their smoking, and then have a call with them. And in that call, we'll give them instructions on how to use it, answer questions that they might have, and everybody will choose a switch day. And the switch day will be approximately 2 weeks away, 2 to 3 weeks away. And we'll tell people, hey, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I want you to try what we sent you and let us know what you want more of. So everybody in the NRT group basically is getting more NRT, unless they say, I hate the lozenges, don't send them, but they're basically all getting more NRT. But people in the tobacco group and the preferred flavor group, they have a choice, and we're going to say, hey, we're going to send you X number of pods. How do you want that broken up? And so they really get to choose what they want in this pre-switch period. We send out a survey to them. And yeah, so we're asking them, what do you want? And then on their switch day, everybody gets like a text reminder. Hey, today's your switch day. I want you to stop smoking completely and use either your nicotine replacement product or your e-cigarette product that we sent to you. If you can't quit completely, then please reduce your cigarette smoking as much as possible, because that's best for your health. They get products for 12 weeks. So it's a long study. There's a 12-week period where we're tracking their tobacco use over time. They're doing remote assessments over this time period. And we also have phone calls. Here at the 6-week phone call, we'll ask if people need more product and what flavors they want of the next product shipment that we can send them. And then at 12 weeks, that's really where we're looking and seeing, did you switch completely, etc. It's nationwide, but we are sending everyone breath monitors that can verify their smoke exposure. So we'll be able to say at the outset, for sure, everyone's a cigarette smoker. We're not giving e-cigarettes to people that don't smoke. And we'll be able to say, when someone says that they quit completely, we'll be able to biochemically confirm that. And then we'll also call them at week 24, which is 6 months, but they presumably don't have any product left at that point. We're just following up to see if they've still continued to switch completely, if the NRT people are still remaining quit, that kind of thing. So the primary outcome is cigarette smoking and complete switching, which is abstinence from smoking. And so the question is the rate of complete switching higher among the preferred electronic cigarette group? And the goal is to provide information to FDA about the potential benefit or not of non-tobacco flavored e-cigarettes for adult smokers. And again, this is an FDA funded grant. So FDA funded it to provide them with this kind of information, and it's in partnership with NIDA. So in summary, just to wrap up, the FDA has the authority to regulate tobacco products to improve public health, and the regulations need to consider both users and non-users. In my humble opinion, regulations that reduce the appeal and addictiveness of a combustible tobacco is really what's going to have the biggest impact on public health. That's where we're going to save the most lives. I think a nicotine reduction regulation reducing the addictiveness of cigarettes is probably the most effective possible intervention that we could do. But menthol, I think, has the potential to make a big impact as well. And I think it's important. And so I have an upcoming RCT on menthol, and we plan to start recruitment on 11/1. Regulations that reduce the appeal of non-combusted tobacco products like e-cigarette flavoring regulations are complicated because they impact people who use e-cigarettes or use cigarettes and people who don't use e-cigarettes and cigarettes, like youth who might try e-cigarettes. And so that RCT, we're saying that the start date for that is 10/1, but I don't think it's going to quite start on 10/1 because I think we're not going to have the e-cigarette product quite yet, but we'll do our best. We're aiming for that. And I'll just say thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you to all of my collaborators. All of these people are on the grants that I just talked about in some way, shape, or form. And these are the wonderful staff who are actually going to do the work and conduct the grants. And they've really been busting their butts to get everything ready for these trials. And I'll stop sharing, or I'm just happy to take any questions with the remaining time.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Smith. You can stop sharing or leave it up. The choice is yours. You may need to flip back, but that's easy to put.
Yeah, if people have a question, I can throw it back up there.
So any questions? You can unmute yourself or type your question in the chat. It was a lot to process. I appreciate you presenting both studies so well in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, the news articles really covered them together, I think, because they're both flavoring related and they are both FDA funded, but they do have different focuses, different research questions.
Tracy, can you tell us a little bit about the other 2 studies that y'all just got funding for?
Sure. So they're related in that there is an e-cigarette component in both of them, but they're different as well. The other two are not FDA funded grants. One of them is NCI, and that's in partnership with Matt Carpenter, who conducted that large trial that I talked about. That's an MPI grant. The two of us are going to do that together. And the goal of that trial is really to ask about treatment methodology for smokers and whether or not we should be, as people who are providing treatment to people who smoke, whether or not we should be assessing whether or not a pharmacotherapy is working for them early and switching them to something else. And so people in that trial get a 4-week supply of either nicotine replacement therapy or varenicline, Chantix. And then we call them 4 weeks later and we assess how they're doing. If they're not doing well, like if they haven't been able to achieve abstinence yet, or they're not abstinent at that time, then we randomize them to either stay on that and try again, or to switch to something else. So we're really going to compare whether or not switching pharmacotherapies is better than continuing on with the same pharmacotherapy when a pharmacotherapy doesn't seem to be working for you. So people who got varenicline would get NRT, people who got NRT would get varenicline. And, the hypothesis is that if something doesn't seem to be working for someone right away, then maybe that's not the pharmacotherapy for them and we should be switching to something else. And then at the end, after 8 weeks of intervention, if someone still hasn't been able to achieve abstinence, some subset of people will get an e-cigarette for harm reduction, with the context, the reason being that, e-cigarettes are really most appropriate for people who've already tried and failed with the pharmacotherapies that we know are safe and effective, like NRT and varenicline. So at the very, very end, and we'll be able to test whether or not at the end, for those people who've tried and failed multiple times, e-cigarettes might be able to rescue them or reduce their harm. And that is going to be 544 people across South Carolina and Alabama. So we're working in partnership with Karen Cropsey at UAB there. So I'm excited about that. That'll probably start in January. And then the last trial is NIDA funded, and it really goes after this question of whether or not e-cigarettes can help people who have tried and failed with other pharmacotherapies. So we're going to recruit people who've already tried pharmacotherapies and have failed. And they'll be assigned to either try again with medication. People in the medication group get to choose between varenicline or NRT, their choice, and we'll guide them on that, provide them with information about efficacy and side effects and things like that, prescribe them varenicline if that's what they choose. Or they'll be assigned to try to switch to an e-cigarette, and we'll provide them with a choice of an e-cigarette, probably just tobacco and menthol flavors. And we'll instruct them to switch completely and look at toxicant exposure, things like that. That's 225 people here in South Carolina. Again, that's going to be Charleston, Florence, and Lancaster. And that one is NIDA funded. I don't know if I already said that. That's a NIDA funded trial. So those are the two trials that I didn't get to talk about today. They are, all conceptually tied together, but different aspects of the same kind of body of work.
Jaren, go ahead, because I don't want to dominate, but I got a couple more.
story of my life. I didn't want to take
No.
away from anyone else that had anything. But Tracy, quick question for you. So we know, or I understand that people quit easier when they have behavioral support as well. So was the intention to leave that out of all of the research arms, just that you didn't want, like, that just adds another component to it?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, to be honest, I think that part of this is a regulation situation. If I get really close to treatment, I got to get an IND, and adding behavioral counseling kind of creates that problem. And we just finished a small pilot that was 30 people that provided preliminary data for that grant that I just talked about, and so in that 30 group of people, 20 people got an e-cigarette and 10 people got combo NRT. And saying we did counseling would be a lie, but we did have the staff go over kind of like a behavioral plan with the person at the outset when they set that switch date in both groups. So, what are the barriers that you foresee? Who's on your team? Who can be a cheerleader for you? What days are you anticipating being the most difficult? Let's come up with a plan for those. So the staff did that with them at the outset, and then the person set the switch date. And in that trial, 35% of people in the e-cigarette group switched completely, and 10% of people in the NRT group switched completely. So really, really good switch rates. That's an odds ratio of 4.8, it quadrupled the odds of quitting. And I think that behavioral strategy conversation that they had with staff, as well as setting a firm switch date, is part of why it did so well. And in both groups, people reduced their cigarette smoking a lot in both groups. And I think that's really because people were engaged in it. But if we add on counseling, then I'm getting really close to treatment, and then I would need an IND. So that's why.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sharon, I know you had your hand up.
I did, but Jaren had the exact same question I did. I was going to ask about counseling. Was that involved in any of it? Because we do know that counseling plus NRT is the most effective treatment strategy. So she already answered the question. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would love to do some of that. And in some of the trials in the UK where they don't have the restrictions on doing kind of treatment work, they have done a little bit more of that. And I think it would be better for both groups to have that for sure.
Tracy, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a researcher, so this is just as a parent.
Yeah.
Looking at it, I forget the exact number of flavors you said were on the market, but it was a huge number.
It's a lot.
And there are a ton of those that are targeted to kids, period. There's no, I guess as an adult, I would never smoke something that's called blue raspberry. Okay, but my kid definitely would, because it's a Jolly Rancher flavor.
Yeah.
Same thing with tons of other ones. Has there ever been any thought about looking at adults and what they choose as a flavor versus what kids would choose and removing those off the market?
Oh,
that's just
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know. So I know that, for example, like the mint Jewel flavor, in particular, that was the most popular flavor with kids once they got rid of like creme and whatever. It was also the most popular with adults. So that's been kind of challenging. I do agree with you that there are some flavors that, in my opinion, are so clearly targeted to kids that there's no reason to have them. I mean, it's not even worth having a conversation. And so, for example, there was just August 23rd, so just 2 days ago. I'm going to share my screen again just to show, not that you guys need more reason to hate this stuff, but FDA came out with this press release showing that they had issued some warning letters to companies. These are e-cigarettes here on the left. And so these are the kinds of things that, and I don't even think there should be a conversation about, obviously. And there are other ones that are so like Captain Crunch flavor, popcorn, like things that are just so clearly candy and toy focused. And I absolutely think those things should come off the market. And it's possible that, that we don't know what the benefit is to adults of having those flavors on the market. We really don't. And so maybe there is none, or maybe the benefit is small. And so I think the data, that trial that I'm doing with Ted, is going to go a long ways towards providing some of that information. I'm sure tobacco industry people are doing their own trials that's really focused on like individual flavors and whether or not individual flavors provide a benefit, because that's what they have to do. But that's our trial is more just about like flavors in general, and so that's why we gave a choice. The tobacco industry, I'm sure, is doing like blue raz versus tobacco, and then they want to show that the blue raz is worth having on the market. And we just wanted to basically ask, like, is a marketplace that has flavors beneficial or not? And we're only providing one half of that equation, right? So we're providing the half that tells you about adults. And it is important to have the other half and to do that work with youth. But there won't be randomized trials with youth, right? Because we're not going to hand out e-cigs to youth to ask. So it does have to all be like observational and survey data when it comes to youth. And it is a challenge. I have young kids too. I'm a parent. So, thinking about how to talk to them about these products is complicated. I tell my kids, we are both simultaneously proud of grandma because she doesn't smoke anymore and she uses her vape, and we are proud of her because that is really hard to do. And you are also never to touch that. And so it is a hard thing. I understand that. But my 7-year-old seems to get it, and fingers crossed on my 3-year-old, we'll see. She's a little more of a daredevil. But we're doing our best.
Because in this one study, you said that you were limiting the flavors available, right? to two fruit. I can't remember if it's two fruit flavors or something.
Yeah, so in that flavor study, the preferred group, the group that gets to choose, they get 2 tobaccos as a choice, 2 menthols, and 2 fruit. And I'm probably gonna get it wrong, but the fruits are like berry cream and tropical coconut or something like that. And there are flavors that will be 5% nicotine. Just when we talked to FDA about, we talked to the FDA about the fact that we weren't going to use Juul anymore and what did they want us to use and that kind of thing, like what would be best. And they don't tell you what to do because they're supposed to stay out of the science, but they did say they thought that the information that would be most beneficial would be products that were most similar to what's popular in the market here in the US. So, we tried to select something else that was 5% nicotine, a salt-based device, a pod-based device, like what's really popular. And so that's how we ended up at the Vuse Alto.
Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate that. Does anybody else have any questions?
I didn't put my email address up there, but please feel free to email me if you have comments that you're not comfortable sharing or thoughts that you're not comfortable sharing with the group, or if you have follow-up questions. I'm always happy to chat. And yeah, thank y'all so much.
This is great. Thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.